Hi everyone, and welcome back to the great mini rebuild. And this is part 8. So we're getting back to the business end now. This is the fun part. This is where we put it back together, and we've got all new bits, and it's nice and clean, and this is just the bit I really enjoy. Anyway, so rear suspension and the front suspension. These are the big mechanical bits, I guess, that you do. Little bit of light machining to do things like fix elongated pivot holes and things like that. Fortunately, I have my own lathe and things, so I can do that. Fix up the original Lockheed master cylinder things. They came up quite well for relatively old devices. You can see. I think they'll look the part rather than going out and buying new plastic ones. The handbrake is in, all the cables are in, the proper grommets and gaskets that go through the bodywork are done. It's looking good. Accelerator, brake pedals, these sort of major fittings, if you like, are going in part by part slowly, looking good. Then it's onto the front suspension. So here I don't like putting back together things with safety things that are not right. So when I do rebuilds, I always replace the brakes. I always replace the calipers. I usually buy new discs because they're just as cheap as getting the old ones machined. So then it's back to rebuilding these sliding windows. I know they're not optimal. I do have a set of wind-up window doors, but this car was built with sliding window doors, so I don't see any good reason to put the wind-up ones back on. I like to have the originals. Anyway, I'm lucky enough to have a 3D printer, so that's been getting a bit of a bashing in the last couple of days. I've been printing things like these gaskets, the rubberized gaskets that go under the window clamps, gaskets that go under the door handles, gaskets that go under the boot hinges and things like that. Printed out of flexible TPU, I think it's called, rubberized material in the 3D printer, and you get a much better looking and fitting gasket than some of the crappy ones they supply. Then it's onto some silly little things like fitting the windscreen wiper motor and fitting the power distribution module, which you can see on the bulkhead there, and then on to fitting the car out with some these are anti-vibration pads, I guess you'd call them. Stops the drumming of the metal panels. Really work quite well. Put them over all the large metal panels that sort of drum when you drive it along, and it helps reduce the echoey tin box effect. We'll be putting in some soundproofing as well underneath the carpets, but this stuff just stops the drumming that you get on a large piece of tin. Then it's on to fitting the rear window and the front windscreen. So bought a special tool to help do this that helps put that, I don't know what you call it, but the silver bit that you press into the rubber that helps wedge it all together. With the special tool, it actually went in quite easily. So they both went in and they look good. Well, then I thought I'd tackle the instrument panel. Um, so this car's got the centrally mounted 0 to 100 mile per hour speedo with the two satellite gauges for temperature and oil. The round binnacle that holds the speedo in place is in really poor condition, really crappy, and same with the actual gauges. So disassembled the gauges, cleaned them all out, repainted the internals in the original bluey colour that they are, and got some new illumination LEDs. I noticed the fuel gauge in this. This should be black, I think, but it's got a white one fitted, so probably going to have to change that at some point. But the renovation sort of looks quite good. As you can see here, the binnacle is looking pretty tatty. So what I thought I'd do is I would replace that binnacle because it's pretty redundant in a lot of ways because the 3 gauge binnacle goes over the top of that. So I thought I'd use the 3D printer again, and I 3D printed some brackets, which you can see here, that replace that inner binnacle with these two brackets and hold the speedo in place. the metal bracket you can see there holds the two outer gauges together, and the 3D makes it much more accessible than having that white binnacle underneath the 3 gauge one. So here you can see the final thing with the two 3D printed brackets that hold the speedo in place, and then the 3 gauge framework that bolts onto that, and then the black plastic 3 gauge binnacle that sits over the top of the whole lot. I think it looks quite good, and it's certainly much easier to work on and manipulate later. So while I had the 3D printer out, I printed up a cover that would go on the firewall side of the engine that covers up the back of the instrument gauge and blocks a bit of noise from coming in underneath there. I know you can buy these, but it was pretty easy to print, so we did. So then it's time to start looking at the interior. So these are the roof liners. They're fairly good condition in that there's no obvious tears or seams problems in anything. They're just discoloured from water and where the glue they used around the edges has seeped through the material. So I thought I'd have a crack at cleaning these up and fixing them rather than spending some more money and buying new ones. So what we did is we first of all we scrubbed them down with wax and grease remover and all sorts of crap, see if we could get the stains out, and that was reasonably successful, but they're still heavily stained around the edges where the glue marks the material. The glue was strong and intact. It had just soaked through the material and marked it. So I found online this spray paint, or it's a special vinyl colouring solution, and you can spray vinyl, it will recolor the vinyl. It's not like a paint per se because it doesn't peel off in the same way, but it soaks into the vinyl and changes its colour. So I thought I'd give that a crack and spray this onto the roof lining and just see how well it came up. So I've gone for a slightly darker grey than the original sort of creamy whitey grey that it had originally, on the basis that that would probably help cover the glue marks. This actually turned out much better than I expected, and it covered all the glue marks, gave it a nice consistent colour, and really you couldn't tell that it had been sprayed or coloured in any way. It looked like the material was this colour. So all in all, saved quite a bit, and it ended up looking really good, I think. With the roof in, it turned my attention to things like sun visors, and oh, they were dreadful. They're little bits of cardboard and they're warped like a figure S. Dreadful things. So I saw some people had made these out of coloured perspex. So I thought, well, I've got some coloured perspex. Let's make some sun visors. So I did. So I cut them out of a tinted perspex that I had, and actually made the bracket that holds it in place rather than buy it, because that's just made out of a straight hinge that I took the centre part of the hinge out, um, and that actually worked out better and more and far stronger than the original hinge assembly. I've also made a nice sort of 3D cover that covers that whole hinge area in the same grey as the roof, that makes it look a little more finished, but it came up quite well. Happy with that. So then it's onto the boot area. So there's a few things I had to do in here. Um, I had no breather pipes. They were just open to the boot. So I made up this breather pipe that links the two tanks together and then vents down through the proper vent floor, down in the floor and out underneath. I also had to make the balancing pipe for the fuel tanks because that was missing as well. So I made that, bolted it in place, and that all looks quite neat and tidy. Um, then it was time to fit the two fuel tanks, connect them all up with the new plumbing, and put on the quick release fuel caps on both sides, which really sort of set it off and looked really quite spiffy, I think. And last of all, it's make up the new what do they call this, a boot floor, I guess, that sits over the top of the spare wheel and covers up all the mess underneath. You can also see in here I've got an isolator switch on the battery that, if I put the car in the garage and store it for a while or don't drive it, I can just turn that isolator switch off and isolate the battery. The astute observer will also note that stupid little switch up in the top left-hand corner is not a normal mini bit, but I like to have things like boot and bonnet lights on my cars, so that's part of one of some of the subtle improvements you'll see later. Now it's on to one of the big parts of the car rebuild that I'm sure the purists will be up in arms and shout me down, but I love doing this. So in this car, I'm not putting back in a standard wiring harness, and I'm not putting back in the stupid little two fuse box that they had with all its crappy switching. I'm putting in a black box P14 PDM, it's called, which stands for a power distribution module. So here you can see it's bolted to the right-hand side inner wing. Now, I don't know if you know much about these little boxes, but the way they work is that you feed battery power essentially straight to the middle of the device. That's that big red cable coming in. Then this particular one has 14 outputs and I think it's 10 inputs or 12 inputs. Inputs can be high, low, or floating. Outputs can be either on or off. They are isolated from each other. So an input is just an input and you tell it what you want it to do. An output is just an output and you tell it what you want it to do. So you program these using the laptop or a computer. So for example, if you want the headlights, you put the headlight high beam circuit onto, say, output number 1, and then you have a switch that says high beam. So using the software, you can program things like the blinkers to flash at whatever rate you want. I've programmed in things like an intermittent wiper, so even though it's only an old single speed wiper, I can use a 2-position switch where the first position, it triggers the wiper to wipe intermittently, and that's all done in the software in this little box. Not for everyone, but it's a good hobby, and that's the purpose of all this. So it's fun programming it and seeing what you can do with it. So we're also using all Deutsch plugs, which are these waterproof plugs, a big improvement over the original Lucas Prince of Darkness bullet connectors everywhere. And I've got separate looms that run like front loom, a roof loom, an engine loom, and an instrument loom, and they all go to this single connector plug box that sits up underneath the front right-hand wing. That will get covered up, so you really won't see it later, but it does help the wiring, keeps it all nice and logically separate. So there's also a couple of other tricky little things in this. For example, this only has an indicator bulb on the end of the blinker stalk for the indicators. So when either the left or the right flashes, then this one bulb on the end of the stalk needs to flash. Secondly, things like the oil pressure and ignition lights are generally active high, not active low, so I needed to do a little bit of fiddling there to make it work. So I designed this little circuit board that conditions the signals, I guess, and makes it nice and simple. So this little box that I've built plugs in, and that drives the ignition light, the oil pressure light, and combines the 2 indicator lights to produce the one flashing stalk light. So with that's done, it's down to laboriously checking the wiring diagram I've drawn against the actual looms pin for pin and end-to-end testing every single circuit to make sure it's right, and also to validate my drawing, because I've produced an A2 size drawing which is fully laminated, so it looks nice. That'll go and stay with the car. So anyone who gets this car later will have a nice diagram that's accurate to the car that represents the electrical work that I've done. With all the electricals out of the way, it's time to start looking at the interior. So I've put all the sound deadening stuff in that you saw earlier, but now we're fitting the acoustic lining material and starting to fit things like the air vents and binnacles and things to make sure that they all fit on the internals properly. This is all pretty straightforward, albeit pretty hard on the back, I have to say, leaning over and pushing all this stuff into place and gluing it in and cutting it around and everything. But fitted things like the dipper switch and the start switch on the floor. Uh, the handbrake is in. You can see we've cut around that. And then it's time to fit the rear trim panels and things. So now it's getting exciting. You can see here the rear seat and the rear side panels fitted. I've gone for this black and yellow effect with the interior. I think it looks really flashy, and it's not common. I didn't want a British Racing green Mini that everyone's got. I wanted this to stand out and look something a little bit different. So the black and yellow sort of looks the part. It's very cheerful. I'm really happy with the effect that it's giving. I'm using a grey carpet to sort of give it a little bit of a lift. It also matches the roof line and stops it being completely black inside, if you like. So there's enough yellow and black to give it that really contrasty look, and then the carpet being this grey colour, I think offsets that really quite nicely. Not everyone's cup of tea, but hey, I like it. It's my car. Tough. So then it's on to the dash. So we fitted the lower dash rail. I've decided to pad that because it wasn't perfect. It had some holes in it that shouldn't have been there. So I've padded that, but I've left the top one yellow, which I think looks a little bit more in keeping. Um, I've managed to get most of those creases out of it that you can see in this photo. I just took a little bit of the heat gun and a bit of time to manipulate it to try and get it nice and smooth. But overall, I think the end result of the front end there really looks quite nice. So overall, we've actually got quite a lot done this month. I put the wheels on because we I got some tyres for it the other day, and that all looks very spiffy. So it's starting to look like a real car now. So probably another couple of weeks to tidy up the interior and all the little loose ends, and then we're going to be ready to drop the engine in, and that's really it because it's finished other than putting the engine back in. So that'll be fun. All to be continued. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.